Hello, everyone. Good evening or good morning to all the participants joining from different locations. We are very excited to have 300 registrations from 36 different countries today. Please use the chat box to share where you are connecting from. I see some has already started. My name is Nuria Prat-Guitard. I'm with the Pau Costa Foundation, and I would like to welcome you all to this webinar organized in the framework of the Fire Across Boundaries conference. The conference is an initiative, joint initiative between the Association for Fire Ecology, the Pau Costa Foundation, and two Italian partners, the Regione Toscana and the University of Florence. Yesterday, we already had one webinar focused on the impacts of COVID-19 on the 2020 fire season. And we had a great group of panelists giving an overview of the challenges and approaches from different regions to tackle the current situation. And this was Argentina, South Africa, Europe, and North America. And today's webinar is dedicated to the integration of fire ecology and bioeconomy into wildfire management. Before we start, I'll go through some technical aspects of the webinar. You can see in the screen, there is a hashtag for social media, Fire Florence Virtual. Please use that to exchange through the social networks. The webinars are being recorded and they will be posted in the conference website and also will be available on the Pau Costa Foundation YouTube channel. Please use the Zoom chat for technical questions and for introductions. And if you have questions for the panelists, use the Slido app. You can access it through the link that we are going to share through the chat, and also using the QR code that you can see in the screen. I would like to briefly mention a few words about the Fire Across Boundaries conference. If we can move to the next screen, thank you. The event was planned to take place in Florence, Italy in October 2020. In fact, during the week we are now, but we had to postpone it to October 2021. The aim of the conference is connecting fire ecology research and management across geographies and disciplines, and become a gathering for the fire community in this very challenging era we are now. For this, we have planned 4 days of workshops, plenaries, oral presentations, posters, and field trips and more. And we are going to open the call for proposals in early 2021. We are planning to offer options for virtual participation, and we are also planning to offer options to connect both conferences, so the Fire Across Boundaries and the AFE 2021 Fire Congress. And we are also planning on launching some other initiatives, such as the Wildfire Ecology Knowledge Hub, as a way to keep the fire community connected when we are not in those great events. So if you want to have, you can have more information about the conference in the website you see on the bottom of the slide, firecrossboundaries.org. And now I will give the floor to Annie to introduce the film festival winner. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Oxerart, and I'm the Administrative Director for the Association for Fire Ecology. And before we move on to our presentations today, I'm going to share the results of the Fire Ecology Film Festival that we hosted virtually. So from early on, the program committee knew that they wanted to have a film fest at the conference in Florence, and we thought this would be an interesting activity to add on to the webinars this fall. We were really thrilled with the response. We had 23 submissions, including films from France, Switzerland, Portugal, the US, South Africa, Brazil, Canada, Mexico, and Argentina. If you haven't had a chance to watch any of these films, they will be staying up on the Fire Across Boundaries website. And you can take a few minutes to watch some of them. The link is down at the bottom of your screen there. We opened up voting on October 5th, and over the last 2 weeks, we've had 339 people that voted on their top choice of a film. And I'm pleased to announce that the film that received the most votes is called Walking with Fire. This film was submitted by Justin Sullivan from South Africa, and it aims to increase awareness and understanding of wildfires in South Africa and of the work that firefighters are doing there. We're happy to invite Justin to the conference in Florence to show the documentary when we gather next fall. And we're very pleased that Patrick Ryan is able to be on the webinar today. He played a large role in developing the documentary with Justin, and we're going to give him a couple minutes to introduce the film to us.
Hi, everybody. Thank you to everyone who voted for the film. I think it means a huge amount to Justin and also myself, and as Director of Vulcan Wildfire Management, whose focus is very much on awareness and specialist wildfire management skills. This is kind of a labor of love of Justin's for a 2-year period where he was up in the fire line. He'd been trained up. He went out with the crews through day and night to try and capture a real experience of what it was like to be a wildland firefighter. One of the main reasons behind that was raising awareness and also trying to get the public to understand the role of a wildland firefighter, which isn't very well known in a country like South Africa. The public tend to look and see firefighters as the structural guys with trucks, not understanding the amounts of people up in the mountains who are working through the day and nights, chasing fire and sort of managing that. Along with that understanding of what it is to be a wildland firefighter, both Justin and I shared a long-standing desire to try and raise the need for awareness around wildfire management. And the reason for that is to try and get budgets to move more towards the preventative and awareness side of things and less on the suppression side. So I think running this film documentary competition is a great idea. And I think we need to see more of this because it'll drive, there's some great documentary filmmakers out there. And wildfire is quite an attention-grabbing medium or incident. And I think this is a way of trying to get that message through to more and more people around the awareness and the prevention side. We've got some fantastic programs out there like FireWise and Fire Ready, Wildfire Ready, and FireSmart in Canada. But I think sometimes they struggle to get through to people just because of it seems a little bit difficult for people to deal with those preventative tasks. And I think bringing the message through in the visual medium, which is so powerful, is a great way of trying to achieve this. So again, just want to say thank you to everyone who voted. Thank you for putting on this webinar, and it's great that this is an opportunity to try and get more awareness spread out there. Thanks very much, Annie.
Great, thank you, Patrick, and congratulations to you and Justin and the team. And if you're on the webinar today and you submitted a film, thanks for being here and thank you for your submission. And we're going to send out more details about the results later this afternoon by email. So today's panel is going to focus on the integration of fire ecology and the bioeconomy in the wildfire management, and will be moderated by Claire Belcher. Claire is a professor of wildland fire at the University of Exeter and is the director of the Wildfire Lab there, which is an experimental fire testing lab that aims to improve our understanding of the flammability of ecosystems. She completed her PhD in 2005, looking at the possibility that wildfires could be ignited by large asteroid impacts with Earth. She then moved to University College Dublin, where she researched how changes of abundance of gases in the atmosphere influence flammability, and then to the University of Edinburgh's BRE Center for Fire Safety Engineering to look at how plant and leaf morphology influences flammability and the energy released from wildfires. Claire has been at the University of Exeter since 2012 when she secured funding to set up the Wildfire Lab, which has since supported a range of research projects. So thanks, Claire, for being here today and moderating our session, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Hello everyone, sorry there as usual trying to get my video to turn on and off. So again, welcome back to today's Fire Across Boundaries webinar session. We're changing the topic a date a bit. So yesterday we were obviously looking into wildfire and the linked effects of COVID-19 and how that was fighting our wildfire and how that was affecting our wildfire fighting, management, etc. But today we're looking into integrating fire ecology and the bioeconomy along with wildfire management, which is quite a different topic. So our speakers this morning, this evening, this afternoon, wherever you are covering aspects of fire in respect to things like policy, risk management, fire management, climate change and ecosystem services. And they're going to be covering an array of regions and approaches from across Europe, Africa, Australia, and from wet to dry landscapes. And I think this topic is really important actually, because it's perhaps more important than ever to consider understanding of fire as part of an integrated Earth system, and now even more important from socio-ecological and socio-economic standpoints. And these things really all need to be brought together if we're going to be able to find ways to work with fire, to manage fire and manage our landscapes as a whole. So hopefully we're going to get a bit of a flavour of this from all of our panellists today. So we've got 4 expert panellists. These are Nicolas Favre as the European Commission's Expert Policy Officer in Wildfire. We've got Esther Amoako, an expert in environmental management from the University of Development Studies in Ghana. Rebecca Bird, who is an ecological anthropologist and very well known for her work on the ecology of human fire use. And finally, Martu Conedera, the head of the Forest, Snow and Landscape Unit at the Swiss Federal Institute and a specialist in community ecology, including wildfire. So it's going to be hopefully an exciting afternoon. So if you have any questions that come into your mind as we go through the people's talks, please add them up onto the Slido. I'm going to post the Slido link just again right now into the chat in case you haven't already opened it. You just simply need to click on that link, add your name and click join. You don't need to register or anything like that. So please do get your questions coming in for our panelists so we can have a discussion at the end of the talk session. Okay, so if everyone's ready, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, and that is Nicolas Favre. He is going to be speaking about FireSmart policies in the EU and the importance of integrated fire management, an integrated fire management approach. His presentation is going to introduce the recent European Union policy developments relating to wildfire risk management in line with the new EU Green Deal and how the research and innovation agenda serves these priorities. And he's going to include recent grants that support some of these opportunities and show us some opportunities for international cooperation on wildfire research. So all very relevant. So I'm going to hand over to you, if that's okay, Nicolas.
Yes, hi Claire.
Thanks.
Just try to turning on my video if you can see me.
I think it's coming up.
So thanks for the introduction while waiting the video to load on. And hi everyone, very pleased to attend this event, and also to be able to present the recent policy developments so far in the EU. So I'll try to share my screen now. Is it working?
Yep, still good. We can see it. Thanks. We're all good to go.
It's in presenter view or no?
Yep, it's in presenter view, Path. Oh no, we can see it as you normally should do. So it's all good. Go ahead.
Okay, perfect. So so hi everyone again. So my name is Nicolas Favre. So I worked at the European Commission in the Directorate General for Research Innovation So basically my job is to develop and promote the research innovation agenda for disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. So this includes natural hazards such as forest fires, but many others. So today, as Claire mentioned, so there is a full program. So I'll try to summarize the recent policy development in terms of forest fire research, what the EU has supported to improve the wildfire risk management, as well as the recent policy developments in line with the European Green Deal as a catalyst for change. So just as a reminder, so I just put this slide so for to show that forest fires are still a very serious and increasing threat across Europe, both being a natural component in many ecosystems across Europe, but more and more European citizens suffered both directly and indirectly from wildfires, especially during the years 2017 and 2018. So they were very dramatic in terms of fire activities, both in terms of number of fires, magnitude, severity, and human casualties. So in 2 years, those wildfires actually killed more than 200 people, more than 1 million hectares were burned. Also, a quarter of this was actually in the Natura 2000 areas, so very highly valued for biodiversity. The last fire season, so 2019, was also unusual. So we started the year with a large number of winter fires, so off season, which in a few months destroyed more forest actually than during the entire year 2018. So in addition, to this extraordinary, let's say, socioeconomic impacts in terms of loss of human lives, residents, first responders, health, infrastructure, and economic activities, also these fires have also serious and sometimes irreversible impacts on ecosystems and biodiversity, considering soil degradation, but also water scarcity and biodiversity loss. So not to forget that these wildfires, and we have seen that also during the year 2019, are among the first contributors to climate change, with up to 20% of greenhouse gas emission per year. And the large surface which are burned actually cannot absorb CO2 any longer, which reduce the mitigation potential of carbon sink. So this is where we stand until now. So what does the future hold actually? So extreme wildfires are now observed more frequently, so in higher latitude and in higher altitude and latitude. They further contribute to accelerate climate change. Of course, climate change is not the only, let's say, responsible factor for that. In Europe, so certain forest practices, ecosystem degradation, rural depopulation also have increased both the depth and the breadth of these wildfires. So climate change is predicted also to increase fire risk. So with longer fire season, more fire prone areas, also different fire behavior, more severe. So what we call mega fires. And so overall the burnt area in Southern Europe during the 21st century would sharply increase. So as you can see in the figure. So that's actually comes from a recent PESETA study done by my colleagues from the Joint Research Center in 2019 that reveals that actually the number of people living near wildland and exposed to high to extreme fire danger levels for at least 10 days per year, so would grow by 15 million with a 3-degree warming compared to now. So those recent projections actually of climate change estimate already global warming of up to 4 degrees under current climate policies. So 3 degrees would be if whole countries would meet the NDC, so the national determined contribution targets that are currently submitted under the Paris Agreement. before I dive into the policy aspects and the instrument that actually can serve to support wildfire risk management, I thought it would be nice to provide a big overview of all the different instruments that are already existing. So the policy landscape, so surrounding forest fire risk management in terms of key instruments and initiatives that are at play. So of course, here I present them. So from prevention and mitigation, preparedness, response, impact, towards restoration and adaptation. Of course, the people, decision makers and scientists in Europe are maybe mostly aware of all these instruments, but it's part of a coherent and coordinated approach to wildfire risk management. So of course, research is part of it. It's supporting each phase, but there is cohesion policy at play. So that is for prevention and preparedness, forest strategy that is also there, like to support sustainable forest management. We have also for monitoring fire danger, forecasting fire activities and monitoring active fires, European Forest Fire Information Service, which supports the Response Coordination Center, so the ERCC, that provides EU assistance to member states. And in terms of better knowledge about the impacts of wildfires, so there is also a knowledge center that gathers key information for that. So there are different instruments, and it's important like to know how research actually is serving all these instruments. So the EU has invested, so the Commission actually in 2018 took the initiative to review the EU-funded research on wildfires. So looking at all the disaster risk management cycle. So we considered a portfolio of roughly 60 projects, covering 20 years of forest fire research. That represents close to 100 million euros. Of course, this research showed several advances in fire knowledge, operational management, decision support system mechanism, and also increased cooperation, so among the key actors involved in the field, so from practitioners to decision makers and scientists. So this review actually identified also the priority challenges that are faced in Europe. So this concerns both the transfer from effective forest fire management and decision making, so using better science-based information. Also, how to address this new wildfire context with extreme wildfire events, so through better prevention and preparedness. Also, some key aspects related to better coordination between firefighting and rescue services. So between the response, the evacuation, planning, for example. Also, this review raised some concerns about the different governance issues that are very disparate across EU member states regarding laws and policies that should be adapted in fire-prone areas. And also, this review highlighted the key and essential role of communities actually to be actors in wildfire risk management, to be more proactive and involved, empowered to become more resilient to forest fires. So the review concludes, through the analysis of the results of these results, that this changing context of wildfires in Europe requires a shift towards a more holistic fire management approach. So this is why this presentation is also in this panel today, looking at integrated fire management, but not only actually through bioeconomy, for example, angle, but also, as you can see in this diagram, looking also at urban and land planning, at also human behavior, socioeconomic aspects, emergency management. So that's why this review actually pinpoints a few recommendations that could be useful to reinforce long-term efforts in prevention and investment. So the basis for action, as highlighted in the review, should be sustainable forest management strategies. Of course, this should be supported through risk awareness and preparedness of local population. Also, the suppression capacity needs to be built up to fight more extreme wildfires during a longer season. Finally, further knowledge also is needed on the impacts of climate change on wildfires within, but also beyond fire-prone areas. So here I try to summarize. So of course there is some added value of all this research that has been carried on under the framework program for research innovation called Horizon 2020, in terms of increased excellence, capacity building, fostering mutual learning and harmonization, network building, cross-border cooperation, and so on. But there is a critical need to accelerate EU efforts to prevent extreme wildfire events. And for this, I summarize these 3 points, which is the first one, that the practice of fire management in Europe is actually not making full use of the knowledge and innovation that has been delivered by the project, that the focus should be on tackling the root causes of fires rather than struggling with the consequences. So again, improving knowledge transfer from, let's say, academic research or practitioner knowledge to decision makers when planning investment, communication activities, or even legislative instruments. And finally, there is a strong need to accelerate actually the demonstration of this integrated fire management strategy. So how we are going to do that? We have started already, so within Horizon 2020, with research innovation action that are targeting wildfire risk reduction. I listed some of them, so looking at forest soil research, at multi-hazard risk assessment, prevention, detection, response, to critical infrastructure, also new technologies for first responders, and also a call really targeted, really articulated around these integrated fire management strategies, where the action will actually generate the knowledge, tools, capacities, and also guidance, so to actually implement this integrated fire management strategy that EU member states need to promote more landscape, land use, forest management strategy that interacts with all phases of wildfire management process. So this call is actually under evaluation now, and this project, which is about 10 million euros, so will start in early 21. There was also questions about the Green Deal in the Slido, and so that's why I try to emphasize in this presentation what the Green Deal is about. So it's really at the heart of the efforts of the European Union, so to be climate neutral and climate resilient, so by 2050. Also, this necessity and value has grown in light of the very severe effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, as it was discussed yesterday by the speakers. So as part of this Green Deal, I will not go into detail because of time, but there is EU climate law that reflects climate neutrality objectives. Also, there is a new adaptation strategies that will further enhance adaptive capacity and resilience, reducing vulnerability of population in very exposed areas, so to climate-related hazards. and also new EU forest strategies, as well as a farm to fork strategy, because food systems also remain one of the key drivers of climate change and environmental degradation, while being also under threat of natural hazards such as floods, wildfires, droughts, and so on. So I would like to highlight also this Green Deal call that has been launched actually recently. So it's the last and biggest call under the current research innovation program, Horizon 2020. So the call tables 1 billion euros to respond to the climate crisis, and within this call, so we placed this topic on preventing and fighting extreme wildfires, so with the integration and demonstration of innovative means. So you can find more information and also the presentation dedicated to this topic here in the link below. This call is structured in two parts. So a very demonstration part with innovation action. So to advance apply research innovation, so in different pilot sites, and also a coordinated and support action that will play the facilitator role in coordinating the different innovation action project, as well as synergies with other calls that I described before. Also in Horizon Europe, so the next framework program for research innovation that we are actually currently developing now at the Commission. So there are different elements that will also be of particular interest, so for disaster risk reduction research, including wildfires. Of course, the usual suspects, so of the previous programs, such as the European Research Council, Marie Curie Action, research infrastructure. So we'll continue to drive scientific excellence, but also a novelty of this Horizon Europe is the research innovation missions, which are a portfolio of action that are intended to achieve measurable targets, so within a set time frame. So there is one mission of particular interest, so for the wildfire community, which is the mission area for adaptation to climate change, including societal transformation. So disaster risk reduction and management will be a very important aspect, so in the development of this mission. Of course, there will be clusters such that will address the full spectrum of global challenges. In particular, so the cluster 3 on civil security for society. So we've dedicated intervention area on disaster resilient societies. I just listed here some of the key issues that will be considered in the next, let's say, 2 years. Integrated disaster risk reduction for extreme climate events, a European partnership, so to better coordinate R&I efforts on climate-related disasters, also high-tech capacities for cross-border crisis response and recovery. And then I arrived to the end, so there are also other opportunities, so to engage in with EU wildfire research. We placed this platform, so which is called the Gap Explorer in the Disaster Risk Knowledge Management Center, so the knowledge center of the Commission, to provide better access to wildfire information for each phase of the disaster risk management process. There are also several groups, expert groups on forest fires, so that are supported by my colleagues from DG Eco, DG Environment, and the Joint Research Center. There are also civil protection networks and knowledge exchange platforms that are available, and that actually needs also to engage with different communities. And finally, international cooperation is highly encouraged in all the different calls, both in Horizon 2020, and it will continue under Horizon Europe. So with that, I thank you for your attention. I welcome any question, and you may access also additional information on the calls that I just mentioned, but also on other policy aspects regarding the Green Deal and also the different reports that the Commission has published using these links. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Nicolas. That's really interesting. Certainly great to hear about, obviously, all the research that's been done in Europe and how you kind of drawn this together to actually get like a much more understanding of where the knowledge gaps are in our approach to wildfires. So what we're going to do at the moment, we're not going to have any questions straight away. Oh, sorry, my computer's being weird. We're not going to have any questions directly after speakers. They'll all be held to the panel at the end of the session. So thanks very much, Nicolas, and there'll be some questions for you later. Okay, so I can introduce our next panelist. So we're moving to a different continent. We're moving to Africa now, and we're going to hear from Esther Amoako, who's going to talk about wildfire management paradigms in Africa using a SWOT analysis. Esther says that fire is an important tool, widely used in most rural livelihood activities, as well as for conservation sites in Africa. And with the projected increasing incidence in fire frequency and size of fires in Africa, along with hotter and drier seasons, she's going to pose the question, what are the prospects of fire management in Africa? So I'll pass over to you, if that's okay, Esther. Esther, are you there? Because we can't hear you at present. If you, oh, you need to unmute.
Yes, I'm here.
Great, we can hear you now. Thank you. Perfect. Right. Yeah, go ahead.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Ghana, and good afternoon and evening and morning everywhere. My presentation is on, my presentation is on wildfire management paradigms in Africa, and looking at a SWOT analysis. I'm doing this presentation with Professor Sally Archibald of South Africa. And I have an outline of the presentation that looks at Africa, the fire subcontinent, the different elements of fire use, conventional and traditional fire management. And then we look at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of fire management in Africa in some conclusions. A lot of authors and literature has described Africa as a fire subcontinent or the fire continent. And this is because there's a widespread seasonal phenomenon in sub-Saharan Africa. And there's approximately 168 million hectares of woodlands and savannas burning annually. As we can find here, the three major savannas across Africa, we have the bush savanna, the dry and wet savanna. And then within these savannas, when you come to West Africa, you can find the Guinea savanna, you can find the Sahel and the Sudan savanna. And also in East Africa, you can talk about the Myombo and the Mopane. And so we see fires running through the African savanna areas. And then in West Africa, the fires start around November ending up to middle of March or early April. And so as we can find here, we see very intensive fires here. And the ignitions are highest during the Harmattan season. And the Harmattan season is characterized by extreme fire weather, and that is low humidity, that is below 15%. And we have minimum, maximum air temperatures ranging between 9 and 37 degrees Celsius. And then we have high wind speed, that is between 11 and 30 miles per hour. And so we can see that around March, around January, that is the highest. We have the highest recordings of fire in West Africa. Then moving to East Africa, this starts between June, July, June and August, and then you move down to the southern part, and so it's like a cycle. The southern part of Africa, the fires are observed around September, October, and November, and so that's a cycle, and that is why Africa is described as the fire continent. And we see that nearly 17% of total land-based accounts for 37% of dry matter burned globally. And savanna burnings account for 50% of this total, as we can see from the global map here. Wildfires in Africa are mainly related to livelihood activities. These are anthropogenic, and natural causes are extremely rare. I can think of natural fires in West Africa around the late 70s and early 80s, that we had natural fires across West Africa. Apart from that, we don't have any records of natural fires, and so most of these fires are anthropogenic, and they're used for many different things and for many different reasons. Like we have increased visibility, and then to prevent later damaging fires, protect crop fields and houses, and then also to prepare croplands. Fire is used to attract grazers. Fire is used to reduce tree cover, increase biodiversity, alter tree grass dynamics, and so on and so forth. So we see that most of the fires that we find in Africa are caused by humans, mainly for livelihood purposes. I have some examples here, and these are photos that I took from my research work, and that's 2 years ago, 2018. And we see this a farm. This is a cropland, and in West Africa, most croplands they're not monoculture kind of crop fields. We have kind of mixed cropping, and the lands are not cleared. Their crops are grown or interspersed with economic tree species. And so, as we can see here, and people feel very comfortable using fire to reduce the grass, so that they prepare the land for cropping. This one down here is a field that I visited during my field trips, and the first burning had already been done, and this was the second burning. That is removing the stumps from the field. And so the fire used even for cropping also depends on the kind of crop. And this one is going to be used for rice cropping, and so for rice, and so we have to get rid of everything and then use it for, so there was a need for a second burn and a first burn and a second burn, so that we can get the land prepared for rice. So in Africa, fire is used as a fire break. So fire break, we see this building here, and it's roofed with thatch, and so community people would burn early in order to avoid destructive fires that would come in later. And so I found this here during my trip, that some young men were burning around their homesteads to protect fires from entering into their homes. So again, we see fire being used to control grass, or to stimulate grass for fresh grass for animals to graze. And so this is what we find during the dry season. We find some fresh grass shooting up so that animals can graze. And after the first rains, then we find this kind of picture that we see here. Then in Africa, fire is used to get firewood or fuel wood. And so when there's burning in the woodlands, the wood gets dried up. And so people go to harvest, and they use that readily for cooking. You don't have to cut the fresh to dry and use that for cooking, but they can't. So that's, I mean, they burn so that it's dry and you can have wood for cooking. And so a good rainy season in wet African savanna means abundant, dense, live fuel. And then when it comes with prolonged dry season, then we have abundant, dense, dead fuel, and that can cause more fires with high rates of spread. So the photo we find here in the top here is rainy season at the Morley National Park. And so we find everything green. And what we see here is the dry season still in the Morley National Park. So outside the park, we have grasses grow up to this. And so when this is set to fire, then, or when fire gets into this grass, then it's going to cause a lot of high fires, high intensity fires, and that is causing a lot of damage to very important woody species. We can see this one that is burned to ashes, and this is where there's no control of fire. So now talking about fire management, we all know that the type of fire depends on climate, on vegetation, and on people. So what can we manage? Can we manage the climate? Can we manage vegetation or the people? And so we said we can control some things about fire, but not all. People can easily control fire burned by fire, area burned, cannot easily control area burned by fire. Why do we say this? Because there are a lot of people burning at the same time, and it's very difficult to control. And also on the frequency, like I showed earlier, some would burn the crop fields just once, others would burn two or, I mean, more, depending on what they want and what they want to achieve. So we say that people can control the size of fire, and so like on farmlands, people can control the size of fire. In conservation sites, people or managers can control the size of fire. People can control the intensity of fire and also the time of the year and the time of the day. So we find two photos here, and I'm talking about some complexities, especially when it comes to the time of burning or managing fires. For instance, if you talk about early burning, what do you mean by early burning? We see these two photos, one in a protected area, and this is a community woodland. We find that the burning in the protected area is not, I mean, it's controlled. One, because there are grazing animals there, and so they control, or they reduce the fuel load. But in a community protected, a community land where there's no protection, there's a lot of grass growth, and so we can expect very high fires, especially when people are not around to control and they don't even know where the fire is coming from. There's so much damage caused during this period. And this is also burned in the early season. And so there are a lot of questions, I mean, when it comes to what time of the year, even though we have control, the different contexts altogether. I have some examples from across Africa. I picked the Morley National Park again because I'm used to working in the Morley National Park. They have different fire plants, and the reason why they use fires for they use fires in the park is to try and burn before other fires come in. There are about 22 French communities around the Morley National Park, and these are hunters, and so they may try to burn to attract animals to their side. And so the park management would rather burn early so that to protect the animals from going out, and also to keep the land open for grazing. They also burn to ease patrols. Okay, so now let's move to Tanzania. We have in the Serengeti, there's also the park managers use fire also to keep the land open for grazing animals. And in South Africa, in the Kruger National Park, they also have different fire plants, just like we have for Morley National Park. They also try to burn early so that they don't get fires coming from outside the park, and that could be more devastating. Okay, so now let's look at the SWOT analysis. We're looking at the strengths, we're looking at the weaknesses in the context of fire management in Africa. And then the opportunities and threats are those ones that are external and that can affect fire management in the African region. So we have a regional sub-Saharan wildland fire network, and I put asterisk because I just found out about this just around last week when I was trying to gather information for this review. There's an AfriFireNet. I found representation from West Africa and representations from East Africa, and I think it's based in southern part of Africa. And then we have institutions, for example, the CSI America Institute of South Africa, the Eureka in Ghana, that provide field-based fire records to detect trends in fire occurrence by time and location. I was fortunate to have gotten some information from these institutes for my PhD studies. And then we do bits of remote sensing, observation for land use types, and we have a strength in existing traditional and conventional fire knowledge. We have different approaches to fire management in different countries, and climate change could limit fuel and we won't have more fires, and we see that as a strength. And then we have the weaknesses. We have destructive fire use practices. And like I mentioned, sometimes it's so difficult to control the fires in the Harmattan period. And that's a big problem that's we're dealing with till now. Inadequate and scattered information is another problem or issue that we're dealing with. And then we have scattered information that we need to bring together if we really want to learn from other countries. We have to come together and learn from these information, compile this information to enhance fire management in Africa. And the scattered information on fire characteristics in major savanna types, and there's inappropriate generalization, because we find papers that would propose some management or recommendations, but we need specific information for the different ecological zones. We have inadequate user-centered. Like I mentioned, most of the fires are caused by humans. And so why not find out why people do what they do and see how we can bring science, research practitioners and users together to be able to control the fires. There's a technical capacity constraint in training and equipment. We don't have a lot of equipment for fire management, and most countries also have policies that are not operational, and my country is one. We have a lot of fire policies, but we need some review and to be able to make these policies work well. And the biggest is, or one of the problems is inadequate funds, and that is affecting management capacity. So what are the opportunities? And like I mentioned, these opportunities are for all of us, for collaboration. We need more research on fire. We need to characterize fire regimes for the different land use types, training in fire management at the local level, liaise with selected universities and research institutions for programs in fire ecology. In fact, when in West Africa, I think fire ecology is not well known. I didn't know that there's a name for fire ecology until I started doing my PhD. And when I described and when I gave my proposal to my supervisor, then he was like, okay, that's fire ecology, all right? So it's little is known about fire ecology in Ghana in particular. All right, so we're still asking for opportunities to develop the Lovi Research Center around the Mole National Park. This is about 80% complete, and we still need some collaborators to be able to finish up the work that has been started. Threats, and we see the increasing climate variability and extreme events as a threat to preparedness, mitigation, response, and prevention. Example, we're saying that more rain will mean more intensive fires. We're going to have more grass growth, and that is going to cause more fires. In conclusion, we're saying that we can control some things, and we have mentioned already that we can control some of the things. We can study the complexities of fire, so we can decide what is most important for a particular area. For instance, what is most important for the Guinea Savannah, the Miombo, or the Mupane. Climates and accidents are out of our control. If we have lots of different types of fire, then probably things will be okay for biodiversity. And then we're saying that in most parts of Africa, we talk less about fire. We need to talk about it so we can manage well. And we think that a landscape approach to fire management is really important. We look not just at the fire, but we look at the people who are causing fires and what is the impact is having on livelihoods. What are the things that we're losing with too much fire or less fire in the Savannah zone. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm ready for questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that great overview, Esther. Really interesting, and I think that it's actually really important and really good that there is so much use and knowledge of fire in Africa. Obviously, in many other countries like the UK and parts of the US, for example, we've lost those the knowledge about normal people burning and doing fires, and that's been very detrimental to us. So it's actually really encouraging to hear that so much fire is used, and it's now the case of managing that usage. So yeah, you guys are well ahead of us all. Anyway, I won't take up much time because we need to push on, but I can already see there's some questions popping up in Slido, and I'll pass them on to you later to answer.
All right.
Okay, so again, moving on, but again, looking to an extent at human usage of fire. We're going to move on to our third presenter today, and that is of Rebecca Bird. She's a professor of anthropology at Penn State University, and she's going to be talking about Indigenous fire regimes and their ecosystem services in desert Australia. So Rebecca writes that people and their livelihoods with long histories of embeddedness in their ecosystems may provide substantial ecosystem services through traditional subsistence activities. So in her talk, she's going to draw on our long-term ecological and ethnographic work with the Martu communities in the Western Desert of Australia to show how Indigenous cultural landscapes buffer against climate-driven increases in fire size and provide habitat for native animal species and increase plant diversity. So again, keeping this cultural knowledge of fire going through the generations is becoming a really important topic. So I'm going to pass on to you, Rebecca, to continue that.
Thank you, Claire. So over the last 20 years, our team has been working with a remote Indigenous Australian community of Martu people in the Western Desert of Australia. And our goal has been to try and understand what role Indigenous people play in this ecosystem. And our focus has been on the effects of hunting and gathering on plant and animal communities. And of course, one of the major roles they play is as an active agent of fire. Martu are the traditional owners of one of the largest native titles in Western Australia, and historically and prehistorically, they occupied much of the Great and Little Sandy Deserts bioregions of Australia for the last at least 48,000 years or so. Now, most of the families that we work with are some of the last contact peoples of Australia. Those were those peoples that were still living a fully nomadic lifestyle up until the mid to late 1960s. After that point, the last nomadic bands left or were cleared from their homelands, but they returned in the mid-1980s to establish 3 permanent communities. And we work primarily in the community of Barnmore, located here. Now, traditional Martu landscape burning is focused around exposing areas of dense spinifex grassland, you can see here, in order to hunt burrowed prey like these monitor lizards, which provide a large portion of the bush food that people consume. Now, fires are lit mainly in the winter months during the cool, dry season between April and October, when prey are hibernating in their winter dens. Now, women are more likely to burn in this way than men. People tend to target areas of mature spinifex grassland, like what you see here, for hunting because they have higher densities of preferred prey. Now, what fire does in the immediate sense is to increase search efficiency during the winter months when prey are burrowed in and protecting themselves from the cold. Now, what happens after the fire, about a few months after the fire, you'll see that most plants will resprout. And with rain, you'll see a bunch of fire ephemerals and early successional plants that will proliferate. And over time, after about 5 to 10 years, the hummocks of spinifex grass will slowly fill in. They'll eventually crowd everything else out but the shrubs. So small hunting fires like this one create a patchy mosaic of vegetation at different stages of regeneration following fire. Now, because people like certain habitats to hunt in, but they minimize the cost of travel to go hunting, they light fires in ways that concentrate fire activity in certain places. And today, this would be along vehicle tracks and close to communities. So this map shows the cumulative density of fire scar center points from 1970 to 2016. And what we see is that human-caused ignitions increase in density from about 20 to more than 900 in the darkest red, all centered around the community of Farmore. Now, this pattern of landscape use today creates two distinctly different fire regimes. So in the upper right here, you're looking at a landscape far from the community that's dominated by lightning fires. You can see only 2 fire ages visible. We have a 15-year-old patch, and then the rest is about 6 years post-fire. In the upper left, we're looking at a region about 12 kilometers from the community. You can see these 2 hunting fires of typical size. They're surrounded by this diverse mosaic of vegetation at different stages of post-fire succession. The same region, a little bit different area, is visible in the lower right here, where at least 5 different fire ages are visible. The oldest is about 16 years post-fire. The youngest is 1 year post-fire. Landscapes without people have few cultural burns and tend to be a lot lower in pyrodiversity, which is the diversity of time since fire age classes. And here this is shown as in richness here in this graph. They're also vastly increased in scale. So we'll look here at the proximity index. The proximity index gets smaller the more isolated habitats are, and the isolation of unburnt habitat is much greater in the absence of people, as this graph shows. And that means that patches of unburnt vegetation tend to be farther apart. These landscapes also are not favored for hunting, as they're also not favored by the animals that Marty like to hunt, reducing foraging returns in terms of the calories per hour hunted. And one of the most significant differences between these regimes is their response to the climate-driven effects of increased fire risk. So fuel builds up within 24 months of cumulative rainfall, and the more rainfall, the more vegetation there is to burn. Fire size stays small with cultural burning, regardless of how much fuel has built up, between about 5 down here and about 300 hectares, while size rapidly increases with fuel in the lightning regime from 500 to 5,000 hectares. Now, through the mid-20th century, massive changes to fire regimes throughout Australia's arid zone resulted when Aboriginal people were cleared from their homelands and patch mosaic burning for hunting purposes ceased. These images here show fires on aerial photography and satellite imagery at 3 time steps. So we're looking at 1953, 1973, and 2003 at 2 different locations. So we have site 1. This was close to a camping place used in the nomadic era, but not accessible for contemporary hunting. There were a lot of small, cool season fires. In 1973, this mosaic broke down and fires were dominated by a few large summer season fires, which continue into the present. At site 2, we're close to the contemporary settlement. It's heavily used for hunting. There's a similar pattern of landscape use during the nomadic era that again broke down in 1973 when no people were around, but it was restored by 2003 when people returned to hunt in that area. So without Indigenous burning in the span of less than 30 years, the frequency and the seasonality of fire ignition shifted dramatically, leading to this huge increase in wildfire size by more than 2 orders of magnitude. Now, nomadic land area use was also spatially heterogeneous. It was just much more extensive than what we see today. So just like today, people concentrated fires. So you see the recent fires here shown in black. Concentrated fires near pathways and residential sites. Okay. Sorry, in the nomadic days, there were a lot more foot-based pathways. So here, see, there's all the foot-based pathways and many more residential nodes. And as a result, a much greater extent of the landscape was under an anthropogenic fire regime than what we see today. Now, through an analysis of more than 34,000 hectares of historic aerial imagery, we found that there were 4 main factors structuring the landscape patterning of the pre-contact fire mosaic. So we have the distance to water, we have total net food availability, distance to trading opportunities, and the existence of an extensive fire mosaic. So the map in the middle is showing you how the extent of old fire, so we're looking at the extent of the fire mosaic, relative to the amount of new fire. So all these little black fires up here, and the black fires are now represented by dots of different sizes. So the yellow boxes here are 100 square kilometer regions that show basically no visible fire mosaic. And you can see what this looks like in the photo examples below, right? No visible fires. These are sand dunes here. And the darkest red boxes are showing you areas where there's really extensive fire mosaics, right? So this illustrates a spot on the landscape here where there's a super extensive fire mosaics. And you can just see a blow up of that box right there. And the single most important factor predicting current land use by the number of present fires was the extent of this fire mosaic. Now, what this suggests is that people do better in landscapes that are more diverse, most likely because there's greater food availability. Now, we further explored the mechanisms that lead to the higher productivity of these cultural landscapes. And I've already shown you how travel cost, both today and in the past, affects biodiversity and landscape scale. It also affects plant species diversity within burnt patches, regardless of time since fire. So through plot surveys, we found that edible species richness here is higher close to the community than it is farther from the community, where landscapes are more diverse. Now, some of these plants, like the bush tomatoes you see here, are highly productive seasonal staples that offer very high foraging returns. Now, this holds not only within patches, it also holds at the landscape scale as well. So the graph on the left shows that plant species richness overall within patches increases significantly with landscape biodiversity. And in the graph on the right, species diversity is higher in landscapes where the size of burnt patches remains small. Now, these pyrodiverse landscapes also have substantial effects on some desert animals as well. So through track and scat-based surveys, we found that pyrodiversity has a big positive effect on the probability that a species will be detected in a 1 hectare track plot. Those that tend to be strongly favored by pyrodiversity include dingoes, monitor lizards, here, the goanna, and kangaroos especially. And monitor lizards and kangaroos are really important prey species for people. And many of these species also prefer different time since fire stages. So dingoes are more active in fresh burns. Monitor lizards prefer to den up in long unburnt grassland. Kangaroos like to feed on the new shoots and fruits that show up in these intermediate stages of regrowth. Now, this is a complex social ecological system, and it's dominated by these small scale hunting fires. And we think that it plays an extremely important role in sustaining not only people, but also many plant and animal species. And primarily, we think through providing the kinds of habitat complexity that supports a more diverse food web. So another way we've explored the ecological importance of indigenous fires through food web analysis. When we embed people in food network interactions, we find that people are much more highly connected than any other desert organism. And you can clearly see this in the network on the right, where the position in the network is organized by connectivity. You have the most connected node in the center, and that node is people. Now, to show how significant people are in this network, if we simulate 1,000 people-focused networks with random links between species based on their body size and trophic level, we can generate a distribution of expected values for network properties. And these are shown in the red circles and arrow bars. And when we compare these random networks to the observed network with people removed, this is the yellow diamonds here, keeping all other connections the same, the network becomes significantly less general. The mean path length between species increases significantly, and the average number of links per species drops precipitously. So when this happens to simulated networks, they often destabilize. They become more vulnerable to extinctions, and they become more vulnerable to the spread of invasive species. And that may be exactly what happened in the mid-20th century as the indigenous population declined and began a process of migration from the desert to settlements and missions. During this period, as fire mosaics broke down, invasive species spread. Many species of native mammals went into decline or they suffered extinction. At least 10 species of small mammals in this region near the Martu native title went extinct. 14 others went into severe decline. Invasive species became common. Since the continent was colonized, more than 10% of its native fauna have gone extinct, and now more than 40% are currently threatened. This is one of the most rapid and extensive rates of extinction in the world in the last 200 years. Now, our work has suggested that there are substantial ecological benefits that could be supplied by remote living Aboriginal foragers. However, there are currently no existing federal or state policies that encourage traditional land use patterns by remote communities. There are things like ranger programs, which are usually funded at a more local level, but they tend to produce very different landscape patterning and fire regimes. And I don't have analysis for that, but I'm happy to talk about that later. In the process of hunting, you have two of the remote Martu communities, Bangor and Punmu, burn an average of about 36,000 hectares annually. The Western Australian government also implements an extensive prescribed burning program aimed at maintaining biodiversity, removing built-up fuels, and rehabilitating fire-adapted vegetation. Now, based on the per hectare cost of prescribed burning in such remote areas, if the Western Australian government alone were to supply the benefits of prescribed fire, plus cover the operating costs of communities like welfare payments, infrastructure, and housing in Martu country, it would be at least $2 million per year. Current government policy is also pretty hostile to the cost of supporting these communities, and it constantly encourages people to support themselves through wage labor so that they can reduce welfare payments. And when people subsist only on welfare, they don't have enough income to get by on purchased food alone. You can see the purchasing power of the amount of welfare that you get in terms of calories per day is quite low. Food income and calories per day possible with welfare payments doesn't really go very far when purchased foods are so expensive. When people subsist only on wage labor, they have no time for foraging and for supplying the ecosystem services that they receive through burning. So supporting traditional land use that allows time for foraging, either through hunter subsidies like Canada does, or through treating foraging as work, would not only increase total food availability, it would promote regional ecological integrity and biodiversity, reduce the risk of large wildfires that threaten life and property, as well as contribute to more sustainable social and economic livelihoods in these remote communities, which contribute to both physical and cultural well-being. And before I finish, I want to acknowledge all my Martu and my non-Martu collaborators, my family, and funding agencies that made this project possible.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was really, really awesome. It really goes to show that fire is such a socio-ecological issue. And in this case, not an issue. It's that really socio-ecology must be taken seriously, and we need to be really doing so much more research to that. So thanks for really leading this over 20 years, because that's a fantastic data set. So again, I'm going to save any questions that people may have to the end. So people, please do send some questions to Rebecca, or anything that you may have to ask about socio-ecological questions and Indigenous burning practices, because it certainly is becoming more and more important in managing the economies, managing wildfire risk, and managing landscapes. So we need to get back our fire knowledge, our local fire knowledge. So with that, we're on to the last but not least speaker of the day. And we're going to shift topic a little bit now, because we're moving into looking at effects post-fire. So I'm going to introduce Martu Conedera, and he's from the Federal Institute for Forest, Snow and Landscape Research in Switzerland. And he's going to talk about fire ecology as a guideline for assessing post-fire risk. So he writes, in mountainous regions, forest fires represent an increased risk for natural hazards such as rockfall, shallow landslides, and debris flows. So knowledge on the post-fire stand dynamics are a prerequisite for assessing the temporal evolution of such risks. And again, this shows, as I was trying to suggest much earlier, that we do really need to think about systems consequences in order to understand all the risks that can stem from wildfires. So I'll hand over to you, Marco, to tell us something new.
Thank you, Claire. So, hi everybody. I will talk about alpine ecosystems, which are not very fire adapted. In our case, beech forest will be the first case study, then coniferous stand that got stand replacing fires, and then chestnut coppices. On the other end, on such steep slope, we have the problem of post-fire risk, already said rockfall and erosion that can end in landslide or even debris flows. And for facing or preventing such risk like rockfall, you need, in principle, a permanent forest cover in terms of stem density, which means number of stem and their size distribution. Concerning the erosion and the landslide, it is very important to keep the root system in the soil so that you have a good distribution in roots, in the volume of soil, and a good number and size of the single root. So let's move to the first study case, European beech forests in the Alps, which are one of the ecosystems that are getting more and more fire prone. They used not to be that fire prone. Usually they burn in winter time with low intensity surface fire, just burning the litter layer. But in case of very steep slope with litter accumulation, you may have eruptive fire that generate convective heat transfer to the crown, so that the buds of the crown are dead at the end without any fire contact. You can see here in the background such a convective line with green foliage above and dead branches below, and here in the foreground the same thing. And this is exactly the level of the heat transfer. So the problem with beech is that you don't have any fire adaptation. So once it is touched by fire or by heat, it loses its bark. They have very thin bark. They get attacked by fungi, and with time, they cannot even react in terms of resprouting, so that they stay green for a while, but then they lose their stability because of the loss of the wood consistency. The good news is that usually due to the heterogeneous geomorphology, you don't have everywhere stand replacing fire, but you have a mosaic of mixed fire severity like in this picture. At the end, you may have very close a dead one and a still alive one, what means that some of the the trees display a delayed mortality after fire, and others are just crashing. This is a very important trait, because thanks of these surviving trees during last year, you may have seed production on site, which result in a regeneration pulse. And this is the strategy that European beech applies for regenerating after fires. So at the end, according to the gap size and to the velocity of the gap creating a mechanism, you have pioneer species like such beech trees. You have post-fire beech regeneration. You see the foliage here that kept in winter. And then you have the mother trees providing the seeds. This is the way that beech ecosystem functions after fire. And now the issue is, how rapid are the decaying processes and how many stems you have during time that provides good protection against rockfall, for instance. So you can model these. We made a huge study visiting more than 40 fires, different in time since burning. And we find out that after medium severity fires, you have a moderate loss in pre-fire beaches during time, which means that the forest stay dark, so you don't have entries of pioneer species. And you have also a progressive regeneration of post-fire young beeches. This means that you hardly have gaps in your protection function, because you keep in time a good number of stems that are able to retain falling rocks. On contrary, if you have high severity fires, you may very rapidly lose the pre-fire beaches, which are crashing very fast. You have more pioneer species, but not enough to cover to rapidly cover the soil. And also the post-fire regeneration of beaches will take time until it is effective. So at the end, you have such a curve of remaining trees, which means you may have a gap in protection. Of course, you can then model these. We publish this kind of model in this publication. So once you know the slope on which you are, once you know the expected rock size, and once you know the slope length that you have available for stopping the rocks, you may calculate. In case of unburned, of course, it should be okay. Low severity fire also. But in case of medium fire, you can see the time period you may expect a gap in protection, or in case of high severity fire, of course, the gap is getting larger and it starts sooner. The good news, the foresters can assess very rapidly if they are on high severity plots or medium plots, and so they can prepare some additional technical work in order to avoid the risk of falling rocks on settlements and so on. The second study case that I want to report is on Pinus sylvestris, Scott pine. In case of stand replacing fires on very steep slopes, we have the problem that the root system very rapidly decay. You have here the method we use for assessing the root distribution and the root size, and we also pool the roots in order to check the tensile force they have. So at the end, we can simulate how much of the original root reinforcement action of roots in the soil it remains after a stand replacing fire. And you see that it crashes very rapidly. After about 5 years, nothing remains in terms of root reinforcement. And of course, the new trees takes a lot of time before they produce big roots or roots big enough to produce any root reinforcement. As a result, also here you have a very long time without any protection. The bad news in case of risk of shallow landslide, you can hardly do something in the burnt area. In this example, we are in the Valais, north of central Swiss Alps. We got 100 hectares stand replacing fire on a very steep slope. And just after years after the fire, we got a huge rain event that provoked a lot of single landslide that ended at the end in a debris flow. And this is the only way you have to protect the settlement. You have to build bassins to retain all the material coming out. In this case, they just make a very sound construction because very, very few of the material reached the settlements at the end. So we could avoid major damages on the settlements and the industrial zone. The last study case I want to report is chestnut coppices. Chestnut is quite disturbed adapted. It resprouts very quickly and very abundant from the stool. And usually when foresters see that, think, okay, we are on the good side, everything is green again, no problem. The problem is that chestnut does not keep the roots, but they renew the roots after resprouting. You see here very well the old root and the new one growing inside the bark of the remaining bark of the old one. So as a matter of fact, you have the same effect as in the Scott pine or in other stand replacing fires. And you may have a huge gap in protection against landslide, shallow landslide. The problem here is that it takes very long to restore this protection, and people usually do not remember that in the risk area they got a fire. In this case, we got also fatalities. 2 people died, and the shallow landslide took place 20 years after the fire. And this is really a problem because people doesn't think about such a relationship with older fires. So I want to thank the team I worked with last 10 years on this topic: Davide Ascoli from Turin, Janet Maringer, colleague of mine, Irin Cadenazzo, and Massimiliano Schwarz from Bern. And at the end, I provide also a list of related literature if you are interested in. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Marco. That's really interesting, particularly that the really long-term effect that you're mentioning there, so that, you know, there'd be some people that wouldn't even know that a fire happened within their lifetime, and yet it still could have a big effect on them. So that's really bringing that kind of these landscape scale effects of fire and the long-term effects that they have to the forefront of our minds. So I'm just going to give a call to everybody to get any questions that you have in for Marco there as well. A very different topic to the other ones we've had, but no less important. Again, particularly important in regards to management of landscapes and fire. So it's my turn to look now at the Slido. So for those of you that have been on Slido, you can see that basically people ask questions and they get to like questions. So I'm going to go through the questions. Probably I'll start with the ones that the most people have liked, hence have sort of moved it up the top of the list. So the first question is for really the whole panel, I would say, but particularly in regards to Rebecca and Esther. And it comes from Sarah McCaffrey. So she asks, along with reinvigorating past cultural knowledge and practices, it would seem important to not lose, via rural land abandonment, lack of support, etc., existing cultural practices or knowledge. So how do we best support for that? So has anyone got any answers there for Sarah? If ever, perhaps Rebecca or Esther? What I might do is, if you're not looking on the Slido, what I'm going to, oh no, I haven't got it on the same computer. I was going to say, could somebody post the Slido into the chat? I've got it open on a different computer, because then at least both people could read that out.
I'm looking at the question.
Perfect.
I mean, I think that I did lay out a plan, right, for how one might support these existing cultural practices. And I think it's just really important to do so in a way that is consistent with the values and the goals of these Indigenous communities, right? So there are programs, like I mentioned, there are these ranger programs, and ranger programs involve people being employed to wear uniforms and go out with drip torches and light fires, or to throw incendiaries from helicopters. And these do not produce the kind, although we still don't have this started in 2011, so I'm still waiting for enough data to be able to look at the difference between that fire regime and the more traditional fire regime. But it does not, just eyeballing it, does not produce the kinds of fire regimes that we see with the traditional foot hunting and the burning and the season, especially the seasonality and the size of the fires being so constrained when people are burning. It's because people are very concerned about the size of the fires that they light, and they look for downwind fire breaks, and they only light fires during conditions when fires are least likely to spread. So how do we do that? I mean, we have to do that by supporting Indigenous social systems, right? So intact social systems that are not devastated by alcoholism, depression, poverty, right? So people that are given the autonomy to live out their lives in the ways that they would like to live them out.
Okay, Esther, do you have any comments in regards to that as well, from your perception of people's use of fire in Africa?
Yes, I did a study. Just wanted to know why people use fire, and especially the frequency of use. And they have, should I say, very genuine reasons. And so it's quite complex. And like I mentioned, it depends on what the fire is being used for and what they really want to achieve. And we're still studying and finding out from them, if fire is not used, what would be the alternative? And it looks like it's the cheapest way that people can, for instance, prepare their crop fields. Instead of bringing in a tractor or a plow, they prefer to use fire because it's very cheap, it saves labor cost. And so there are a lot of cultural things that are really attached to the use of fire in Africa. And that is what we have to, there's more room, the more research to be done around that. And also to determine the traditional fire regimes.
So it seems that both of you are saying that land management practices should really be looking to work with either, in your case, say local farmers or people who are undertaking their burns, but also from your perspective, Rebecca, Indigenous peoples, and kind of building and supporting their cultural practices. So that's really positive. So I'm going to try and stay on this same topic because there's a few questions in this regard, and then I'll move on to another topic. So just give me a second to read down through the questions again. So there's a question here for another one. This one is addressed for Esther. So what are some best practices and or challenges you've witnessed when blending traditional fire knowledge and conventional fire management?
All right, so that's interesting. Conventional fire management, well, I'll talk about fire suppression and then the time of burning. Well, even traditional fire knowledge acknowledges the time of burning as very important in managing fires. But we have been able to achieve or make some successes through community sensitization. And there are some communities that have practiced non-burning in some areas within the community, protecting some of the woodlands. And there's one particular community in the northern part of Ghana that won a UNESCO heritage site. Had a UNESCO's heritage site award. And I think if traditional people can come together and they're recognized internationally, it serves as a motivation to other communities, and that can regulate the use of fire. And so this is one example that I can think of now. I'm sure there are lots, but time will not permit to to just have a review of all those projects and success stories that we have.
Cool, thank you very much. Did anyone else have anything briefly to add to that question? Or I think Rebecca already touched on some of the answer to that in any way. Otherwise, there's another question, which is to you, Rebecca, from Henry Jimenez. So he asks, how do communities control fires in Australia? In addition to the factors mentioned, do the communities also consider other factors, such as meteorological factors, to make the decision to select the site, the date, and the time of the burns? Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, traditionally there were huge consequences when fires got out of control. So if a fire threatened a sacred site, or if a fire threatened someone's camp, or if a fire, threatened someone's child, that person would be held responsible and they would have to undergo traditional punishment. Today, that punishment involves usually paying large sums of money out of a personal bank account to the people that had to go and fight the fire. And so I remember one particular case where a woman's hunting fire, the wind shifted and a woman's hunting fire went toward the men's sacred business spot where they store all their sacred paraphernalia, and all the men had to go out, create fire breaks, sing, do all the ritual business sort of to keep the fire from burning the spot. And then every single man who went out had to be paid $200 by the woman who, right, this is a huge sum of money for these ladies that are usually on welfare Social Security payments. So she had to pay them. So that's one way that people control fire. And so then people are really scared about lighting a fire that gets out of control. And so most women will not even, today they won't even, since now there's been a bunch of overgrowth of vegetation on the windward side of the community, they won't even go hunting over there. They're too terrified that the fire is going to get out of control. So they'll only go hunt on the opposite side of the community, right? So it really restricts where they go on the landscape. There's certain kinds of ownership over different ritual sites, and that also restricts where people can burn the landscape. And then when people are lighting fires, they actively look for fire breaks, right? And they actively avoid burning when conditions make it clear that there's going to be, fire spread. So that's why most burning happens in the wintertime, when the winds are consistent and they're strong, but they're always in the same direction and the temperatures are low. And so they can control you saw how she was controlling how the fire went by doing it, by doing these two lines. Yeah, so they're very good at controlling fire and looking for fire breaks.
Okay,
awesome. That's not to say that fires don't get out of control, and sometimes they do. Sometimes the wind shifts, and
anyone that starts to prescribe fire somehow may have a chance of it being uncontrolled. So I'm just going to have another look through, carrying on this topic, I think, before I switch over. Sorry, there's so many I've got to go through and just check. So actually, this is a question from me. So this is to you, Rebecca, has your research on the Martu communities led to increased support of Indigenous landscape fire practices in Australia?
Okay, yeah, that's a big question, and it's always hard to know what the impact of one's work has been in the policy realm. There have been individuals that we've been able to influence, like especially regional fire. I forget the name of the land use thing in Australia because they're always changing their name.
Yeah,
and it used to be DPAW. I think it might be DPAW now. Anyway, so there's different regional offices that are responsible for prescribed fire in these different areas. And we have a Pilbara regional office that covers this enormous area that includes our portion of the Western Desert. And I did, at one point showed some of my data to the person in charge of that office because we had just come off this fire season in which they'd done some prescribed burning, and it was completely the wrong time of year. It was in late October. This was the end of the dry season, beginning of the wet. The winds were horrible, and they lit off the most area that had ever been burned on during any of my sample years. And so I said, hey, look, guys, you want to see what size fires are supposed to be and when they're supposed to be lit. So we went through some of the data, and he was like, oh yeah, I think I'll revise our ideal target fire size now for the prescribed burning. So at least we've had some impact. Yeah.
Well, let's hope some of these practices will gain more support and be able to influence others. So that's really good. I'm just trying to see any more. So here is, I would say this is a question to anyone. Again, it's kind of about cultural aspects of fire. So has anyone, this is from Tracy Castleman, has anyone found older Mediterranean cultures are more adapted to fire in terms of cultural practices, including home construction and landscape? If so, are there any lessons we might apply to changing fire adaptation in California? I don't know whether anyone knows about this. I mean, I know that there's been some aspects of obviously rural land abandonment, which has made some areas more flammable. So the loss of cultural practices, but if anyone has any insights into the Mediterranean's cultural practices, no. Spec Nuria does, but she's not on the panel, so she can't really answer, I suppose. You can type a message in the box, Nuria, if you have an answer. Okay. Sorry. So I think this is a very interesting question that's been pretty popular. And again, I think that any of you may be well placed to answer this. I think it was potentially appeared during the time that you were talking, Nicolas. So I guess it was aimed at you, but I think it's very relevant. It says, how much science-based information do you need before getting the public involved in their potential responsibilities for preventing the spread of wildfire? So I think that this is something that really cross-cuts all nations, because obviously 95% of ignitions are human ignitions globally. So if anyone has any answer there, so I'll repeat the question again. How much science-based information do you need before getting the public involved in their potential responsibilities for preventing the spread of wildfire? Any opinions?
Yeah. So actually, I tried to give a quick answer in the slide already, but I'll develop for Kathy actually. It's of course science-based information is essential, like to be able like to get people understanding and also acknowledgement of wildfire risk. But I think it goes beyond even the science that is developed from research project, for example. That's why I mentioned that the incentives actually should also come from local authorities, for example, to both involve people in fire risk management. For example, I know that in Australia, there is communities are very much involved in fire risk awareness. They actually participate in a regular program, even in prescribed burning management. So there is this aspect, so governance, empowerment of citizens, but also I mentioned also addressing the protection gap. So that links to making also people accountable for the place they live in, because you cannot live in a fire-prone area and not be aware of what to do in case there is a fire, because that's putting also at risk the lives of the firefighters that are actually in charge of rescuing you. But also like so the regulation in place to actually as it is the same for flooding, for example, people cannot build houses in flood-prone areas. So there should also be regulation that are adapted for wildfire risk. And when I mention also the role of insurance, so there are actually two strategies. Either you increase the insurance premiums, and you say to people, well, actually, if you cannot afford the premium, then you will lose your home in case there is a fire. Or you can actually work with the insurance sectors, and that's why I mentioned the insurance sector has also a very positive role, like to play in actually improving, for example, the resilience of infrastructure, of making sure that there is land clearing around the house, and that would actually decrease the premium of people who actually take proactive actions to reduce wildfire risk. So I think science is definitely the base, but there are also ramifications that we need to consider to get this integrated view. Voila.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously wildfire is described as a wicked problem. You know, one would hope it was in a sense simpler to sort out than the whole climate change scenario, but still it's very hard to change people's practices. You know, you mentioned flood zones there. I live in a flood zone because I like going in the sea. So, you know, I'm not good at advert there, but it's very, you know, I hope that our people, particularly in Europe, who are, you know, we do have a chance, I hope in some of the traditionally less fire-prone countries to look to improving our way to live with wildfires, and actually, yeah, start getting things right, because we're seeing the struggles that other countries are having. So, so I think, yeah, your report is really, really useful, Nicolas, for guiding us.
And just a last point, I think also people can also like to learn by experience. And for example, the people who have witnessed fires are actually much more prone to take further action and get involved in, well, building community resilience towards wildfire risk. So there is also, well, that's related like to the cultural knowledge that actually is building up because of disaster previous experience.
I think we are lucky in the wildfire community that we are a very open community, and that we really do share share our understanding and our challenges and lessons learned, you know, between the whole world. So I think that's encouraging.
Claire, do you mind if I jump in here as well?
No, feel free.
So yes, I agree a lot with what Nicolas is saying, and our company actually did one of the reports for the Western Cape government on the large Knysna fires incident that happened in 2017. And we found that the insurers could definitely be a driver of behavioral change. And I think it's very important to find out the triggers for achieving that behavioral change. I think there's a lot of science, a lot of knowledge, and there seems to be a gap in the communication and understanding how to get people to respond. And we saw that with we found the municipalities were actually interested in offering incentives, and then we approached the insurance industry with a similar idea, and it just hasn't really been taken up yet. There's a fear from the insurer side about losing a client base, so they would rather move as an entire body in that way. And then municipalities get stuck in all sorts of red tape, and what we have in South Africa is there's a health insurer has a program called Vitality, and it's basically a incentive-driven program. The more you do your health checks, the more you train, the fitter you are, the more you get points, and those points are rewarded with various other different things. And I think if we approach risk in a similar fashion and put in behavioral changes to help evolve and get the communications on point, I think we might start to have a lot more success. And we have great programs. It's just that I see them all over the world not getting adopted. And even to Nicolas's point, when we went back to Nyasa a year after the fires had happened, we saw the people building in the same area with the same materials in the same high risk. And it's just, we were gobsmacked as to, did they not learn the first time? So I just thought we really need to look at behavioral science as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think as for those of us who would consider themselves scientists in everybody listening, I think it's particularly important that we really start with working with social sciences, with actual communities on the ground, as you say, trying to get in touch with insurance companies, government, and directing policy, which we do try to do. But I think we often forget that social science and anthropology is so connected with wildfire. And if we are to get what we believe is the case for wildfires actually out into the public mind and start changing opinions, it's actually on our heads to do so. So that's really, really good points made. Okay, so I'm going to try and look through.
So that's really important that we link up with people at the local level. There's a lot of research that is just published in high impact journals, and then we leave the, should I say, the community people that we took data from don't even get a feedback from what we found in our research.
Yeah.
And 2 or 3 years back, there was this funding for research, and it was compulsory from the ACU, the ACU, Commonwealth, and then AAS, that's the African Academy of Sciences, and it was compulsory for you to go back to the communities and share your findings. And so I had the opportunity for a research uptake where I invited traditional authority and the scientists, people from the policy sector and the social sciences to share my findings with them. And I think that if we can build on this, gradually we can achieve our aim.
Yeah, it is really important, and that's just really great practice in doing that. So well done, Esther, for doing that. And I know somebody asked Nicolas somewhere here, I can't quite see it, about do the EU grant systems basically require that their grantees go back and try and take what they find out into policy, or actually to reach out? And I think, well, they do. So you could, if anyone's on Slido, you can read Nicolas's response to that anyway. So it's becoming certainly more common that funding agencies for science do actually require this anyway. So, but it's about us not forgetting that we need to do that and actually making that important to do. So I'm going to I think there is a question here for you, Marco. Where's it gone? I'll just add in here a comment here from Paolo Battagli that says this is why in Italy they've joined the NFPA for wildfire communities, and again the same in the UK. We've started doing the same. So that's just an aside. Sorry, I know there is the question. Where is it? Aha! So this question's from Anya Lojak. And she asks Marco, what is the usual time delay between a wildfire and a landscape and a landslide in the Alps?
As I said, it depends on the fire severity. If you have a stand replacing fire, you can assume that after 5 years, you lose completely the root system of the previous pre-fire stand. So it starts to be landslide prone, the slope. And then it depends when you have the triggering event in terms of heavy precipitation. It may be in the 5th year or later, but the window may last 20 years.
So do they include this kind of risk on landslide warnings? Or I don't know whether you have these types of things. That are they well alerted to people in the region?
Yes, once you realize you get in such a situation, the only thing to do is to provide the lower part of the slope with such I don't know in English, bassin, retaining bassin,
yeah.
the material during the event. This is really the only way we have to prevent major damages, which are different. Yeah, go ahead.
Do people try and reforest and replant to start trying to stabilize the soil with other species, or is it generally a bit inaccessible to kind of do mass plantings and things?
You may do that, but usually it takes the same as the natural regeneration.
Yeah.
The fact that you need adult tree, it takes 20 years in any case, even more. So the problem is really to have a good root system and big roots that provide you this kind of tensile force everywhere in the soil.
Yeah.
And time is the only way to get to.
But it takes a long time, it sounds. Okay, I'm just going to look for one more question because our time is nearly up. So I'm going to try and see if there's one that perhaps a bit more general. No, we've asked that. Okay, well, I guess I did have a question which prompted me. There are many other people's questions, but I want to pick one that can be quite general to everybody. So I think on one of your slides, Nicolas, you had, I wrote down, and it's not picking, I don't know, but I think you had about reducing the incidence of wildfires. Now, as a fire ecologist, I wouldn't necessarily say that should be a thing that we want to do. So my question was, should we, and I'm going to ask this to everybody, not picking on Nicolas here, should we be reducing the incidence of wildfires? As in many ecosystems, we know that they are good for ecosystems, they're important for cultural positions. So is the question more that we should be saying how best do we manage land and fire in harmony? So I wanted to ask the whole panel what they would have to say about what do they think our key management practices, or what's the word? Sorry, my brain's not really working now at this time in the evening. What should our management recommendations be? Or the questions, what do we want to ask now? Should we be reducing the incidence of fire? Or so I've got one in the chat here, a response here: unwanted fires equals wildfires versus using fire in controlled conditions. That's a question, I suppose. So anyone else?
Well, there's a, like, with prescribed fire, there's often a focus on, oh, have we burned enough country, right? This is the same in Australia, it's the same in California, right? So it's like, it's very expensive to burn per hectare. So let's get out there, let's burn as much as possible in a short time frame, we'll get it done, and then we'll save money. In California, tribes get very upset with this kind of burning because it doesn't pay attention to the seasonal aspects of burning to promote different kinds of resources, leading to this very homogeneous landscape, right? Because all these fires happen all at once, right? So that's really no different. I mean, that might be lower intensity, but it's really no different than what's happening with lightning. And the same goes in Australia. I think that if we're going to do prescribed fire, we need to pay much more attention to what local Indigenous knowledge has to say about when historically fire was prescribed and how it was prescribed. And people need to learn from and work with traditional practitioners. So I think that is starting to happen in California. I mean, it's been a real difficult push especially in Northern California, for Forest Service to listen to the tribes in order to change their practices. But yeah, I think that's what we really need to do.
Yeah, I would agree that I think perhaps the term prescribed fire is being generally used too loosely, because what really you're describing there is just management fires. Let's just burn a massive area and let's not think of the ecology, the flora, the fauna, all those things. And actually, yeah, you've got to look at your landscape and think, well, what we need to be creating a patchy landscape. We should be doing it, you know, it will change across what your landscape looks like, what your ecology is. And that would be a true prescription. If we could get Wildfire to work with that. And as you say, Indigenous knowledge is part of that. So quickly, anyone else have a quick response to that? And then I'm going to pass back over to Nicolas.
Yeah, well, quick response. I think it's to the question, if we need like to be reducing the incidence of wildfires because they are good for ecosystems. I guess it's really depending also on the context that we are, because for example, in you mentioned patch mosaic burning, so that's actually possible in regions such as Australia or South Africa, but in Europe, actually, considering the wild and urban interface that we have, for example, in Southern Europe, you cannot implement prescribed burning at the same scale, nor under the same conditions. So that's why the use of prescribed burning is very limited in these areas. The second is actually the goal that you want to achieve. Of course, in Australia, it's for fuel management, because to reduce the occurrence of very large fires. But also some biodiversity aspects also are sometimes considered, but not the priority. Also the indirect effects of prescribed burnings also on, if you take southwestern Australia, which is a wine region, there are also big effects on actually the people harvesting the wine in the Margaret River, for example. So so I think it's this prescribed fire management so needs to take into account, need to be somehow mixed with also a FireSmart suppression strategy that actually, because we still need like to avoid very extreme fires that can be very harmful like to ecosystems, but we still need some level of what we call biodiversity, so fire regimes that actually provide diversity of habitats, plant functional traits, and so on. So that's why there needs like to be a good communication between the people doing urban planning, land planning, also people working in forest management, prevention, as well as people involved in the fire response.
Cool. Well, that's a wonderful answer, and I think we'll leave on that, because I don't think anyone will disagree with what Nicolas just said. It's exactly what we need to be working towards. So I'm going to thank all the speakers for their really interesting talks and the diversity of those talks and all the important questions that they've raised today. So thank you all very much. And I presume that I'm handing back to somebody, Afi, now.
Hi, Claire. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for all the speakers and the moderator as well for this great presentation and question and answer session. It has been really interesting. And just before we go, I would like to mention that the Slido webpage will remain open for some days, and those questions that have not been answered can be answered there. So this space will be available. And also to remind that the films from the film festival are available on the conference website. So those that want to watch them, you can have this opportunity. They are all there available. And thank you very much for all the attendees for being here for these 2 hours, and hope to see you all in Florence next year. Thank you very much.